In a world built on power and currency, Arthur Vance was a king whose kingdom was crumbling. He stood in a room so expensive that the silence itself seemed to have a price tag, a sterile, hushed chamber at the top floor of the city's most exclusive hospital. Every piece of state-of-the-art equipment that surrounded his daughter's bed was a testament to his wealth, yet each rhythmic, faint beep of the heart monitor was a mocking reminder of his powerlessness. Outside the panoramic window, the city pulsed with life, a vibrant tapestry of ambition and dreams that he usually commanded. But in here, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken despair. His daughter, Lily, lay perfectly still, a beautiful porcelain doll lost in a sleep from which no one, not even the world's most renowned specialists, could wake her. Arthur traced a line on the cold glass, his reflection a ghost of the titan he was in the boardroom. His tailored suit, usually a suit of armor, felt like a costume for a part he no longer knew how to play. For weeks, he had thrown money at the problem, treating his daughter's condition like a hostile takeover. He flew in experts from 3 different continents, funded experimental treatments, and demanded results with the same iron-fisted certainty that had built his empire. Yet, the anechoic chamber of this room simply swallowed his commands, leaving only the relentless, quiet hum of machinery. He had bargained, threatened, and pleaded, but the one thing his fortune couldn't purchase was a single, conscious breath from his child. He was a man who had never known failure, and now he was drowning in it. The final blow came not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet, resigned shuffle of polished shoes on linoleum. The lead physician, a man with a celebrated career and a tired expression, delivered the verdict with practiced, gentle finality. He spoke of brain activity plateaus, of diminishing returns, of the body's limited capacity to sustain itself. The words were cushioned in medical jargon, but their meaning was as sharp as glass. They were giving up. There was nothing more they could do. They offered condolences, spoke of comfort and quality of life, but all Arthur heard was the deafening sound of a door closing on hope. As the doctors left, their hushed apologies trailing behind them, the silence they left in their wake was heavier, more absolute than before. It was the silence of defeat. It was in this profound stillness that a new, almost imperceptible sound entered the room. The soft, rhythmic squeak of rubber wheels on a polished floor. Elena, one of the hospital's cleaners, moved with a quiet grace that made her nearly invisible, a phantom in a pale blue uniform. She had worked this floor for years, accustomed to the silent dramas that played out in these luxurious suites. She had seen the bravado of powerful men and the quiet grief of heartbroken families. But there was something in the way Arthur Vance stood, his broad shoulders slumped, that resonated with a pain she knew intimately. As a single mother who had often prayed through her own child's fevers, she recognized the universal language of a parent's fear, a language that transcended wealth and status. She hesitated by the doorway, her cleaning cart a humble shield. Every rule, every protocol, told her to remain unseen, to scrub the floors and empty the trash without intruding on the private suffering of the wealthy. But her heart, a mother's heart, refused to obey. She watched Arthur stare at his daughter, his face a mask of shattered pride and raw agony. A powerful impulse, something between empathy and faith, pushed her forward. Taking a deep, trembling breath, she stepped into the room, her worn-out shoes making no sound. She approached the broken billionaire, her voice barely a whisper, and made a request so simple, so unorthodox, that it momentarily pierced through his fog of despair. Little did he know, this quiet cleaner held a key that all his fortune could not forge, and his answer would set in motion a miracle he would never have believed possible. Arthur's first instinct was a cold, sharp wave of indignation. Who was this woman, in her faded uniform and worn-out shoes, to intrude upon his private hell? His world was one of calculated decisions, of experts and specialists, of problems solved by immense pressure and even more immense sums of money. This cleaner, with her quiet request to whisper something to his daughter, felt like an insult to his suffering, a mockery of the scientific fortress he had built around Lily. He opened his mouth to call for security, to have her swiftly and silently removed from his sight. The words were on the tip of his tongue, ready to be unleashed with the same dismissive authority he used to close multi-billion-dollar deals. He saw her as an anomaly, a glitch in the sterile, controlled environment he was paying a fortune to maintain. Yet the scathing words died in his throat. As he turned his gaze from Elena's earnest face to Lily's still form, the doctor's final verdict echoed in the silent room. "There is nothing more we can do." The phrase was a death knell to logic, a final, unappealable judgment on the power of wealth and science. He had exhausted every logical option, every tangible resource. All that remained was this absurdity, this quiet woman offering a whisper against a wall of medical certainty. A profound and agonizing conflict churned within him. His pride, the very foundation of his identity, screamed at him to reject this foolishness. But his heart, the shattered heart of a desperate father, clung to the impossible. What more was there to lose when everything was already lost? It was a choice between the cold, hard fact of defeat and the irrational whisper of a stranger. Elena did not shrink under his cold, scrutinizing glare. She stood with a stillness that was not subservient, but deeply rooted in a quiet strength. There was no pity in her eyes, but a powerful, shared understanding. She saw not the billionaire, but the father. "I am a mother," she said again, her voice barely audible but resonating with a truth that cut through the sterile air. Sometimes a mother's words are the only medicine that can reach a child. "I ask for nothing. I just want to offer a prayer." Her hands, calloused and chapped from years of hard work, were clasped in front of her, a gesture of pure, unadorned sincerity. She wasn't offering a cure or a miracle. She was offering a connection, a shared piece of her own humanity in a place that had become terrifyingly inhuman. The word mother was the key. It dismantled the last of his defenses. In that moment, he wasn't Arthur Vance, CEO and titan of industry. He was just a father, terrified and broken, standing before a mother who understood his language of fear. The thought of what his colleagues, his rivals, or the media would say if they witnessed this scene flashed through his mind. The powerful Arthur Vance, resorting to the whispered prayers of a cleaning lady. The humiliation would be immense. But then he looked at Lily, so small and fragile amidst the cold, gleaming machinery, and the entire world outside that room ceased to exist. The potential cost to his reputation was nothing compared to the crushing weight of his helplessness. To turn this woman away felt like turning his back on the last, flickering ember of hope in a universe of darkness. With a slow, deliberate movement that felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, Arthur gave a single, sharp nod. He didn't trust his voice. He stepped back from the bedside, a silent, profound act of surrender. He was ceding control, yielding the floor not to a world-renowned surgeon, but to a humble cleaner with nothing but her faith. He watched her walk the few steps to Lily's bed, each soft footfall on the polished floor echoing like a drumbeat in the silent room. A strange, terrifying calm settled over him as Elena leaned down, her lips close to his daughter's ear. The hum of the machines seemed to fade, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the power of a simple, whispered word. He had just made a choice driven not by logic or power, but by a desperate leap into the unknown. As Elena's whispered words faded into the sterile air, a profound and immediate shift occurred, not with a sudden gasp or a flutter of eyelids, but in the cold, hard data scrolling across the monitors, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, which for weeks had been a fragile, monotonous dirge, suddenly grew stronger, its cadence firming into a steady, reassuring pulse. The jagged lines on the screen smoothed into consistent, healthy peaks and valleys. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He stared, his mind, accustomed to processing stock market fluctuations and corporate analytics, struggling to comprehend this impossible variable. He looked from the digital display to Elena's serene face, then to Lily's peaceful expression. It was illogical, impossible, a blatant contradiction of every expert opinion he had paid millions for. This woman had done nothing but speak, yet she had altered the undeniable reality of the room, shaking the very foundations of his world with the power of a simple, heartfelt whisper. Stunned into a state of raw vulnerability, Arthur found his voice, though it was a mere shadow of its usual commanding tone. "What did you just do?" he asked, the words catching in his throat as he gestured helplessly toward the revitalized monitors. Elena turned from the bedside, her gaze meeting his not with triumph, but with a deep, compassionate calm that was both disarming and unnerving. "I didn't do anything, sir," she replied softly, her voice a gentle anchor in his sea of confusion. "I just told her a story, the same one I tell my own son when he's afraid of the dark. I told her that even in the deepest sleep, a mother's love can find you, that it's a light no darkness can ever truly extinguish. I talked to her. In that moment, the immense chasm between their worlds vanished, bridged by the universal language of parental devotion. An unspoken understanding passed between them, and Arthur, in a move that defied all social and professional protocol, gestured toward the empty chair beside him. He needed her to stay. He needed this impossible moment to last. Elena hesitated for only a second before accepting, her presence bringing an unexpected warmth to the cold, clinical space. For a long while, they sat in a shared silence, two parents from opposite ends of the world, united in a silent vigil over a sleeping child. The only sounds were the steady, hopeful beeps from the machines. Then Arthur began to ask questions, not about medicine or science, but about her son. As Elena spoke of the small joys and immense challenges of raising a child alone, Arthur saw not a hospital cleaner, but a reflection of his own fierce, desperate love for Lily, stripped of all its wealth and power. As the hours passed, Arthur's ingrained instinct to solve problems with money surfaced. He reached for his checkbook, his mind already calculating a sum that could change her life, a transactional expression of his immense gratitude. "I must compensate you," he insisted, his voice regaining a sliver of its old authority, but Elena gently raised a hand, her expression unwavering. "You can't pay for a prayer, Mr. Vance," she said, her quiet dignity more powerful than any boardroom negotiation. "Some things are not meant to be bought or sold." Confused, he pressed further, asking why she would offer such a profound gift to a complete stranger. Her gaze drifted to Lily, and a shadow of a long-healed pain crossed her features. "Because I know what it's like to bargain with God for one more day," she said, her voice a near whisper. "I made a promise a long time ago that if I was ever shown mercy, I would spend my life sharing it." This became their new ritual. Every day, after her shift ended, Eleanor would quietly enter the room and spend a few moments by Lily's side, sometimes speaking softly, sometimes just sitting in silent prayer. Arthur, the man who scheduled his life in 6-minute increments, began to measure his days by these quiet, sacred visits. They became the only source of light in his suffocating darkness, a time when the weight of his powerlessness felt a little less crushing. He learned her name was Elena, and she learned his was simply Arthur. One afternoon, as they sat in their now familiar silence, a nurse entered, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and awe as she stared at the chart in her hand. She looked from the steady monitors to Arthur. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "the neurologists want to see you immediately." Something on Lily's new brain scans has changed, something they've never seen before. The neurologist's office was a world away from the hushed quiet of Lily's room. Here, the silence was analytical, punctuated by the crisp click of a pen and the rustle of papers. Arthur sat opposite a panel of the hospital's finest minds, their faces a mixture of professional restraint and unconcealed bewilderment. On a large, backlit screen, two images of a human brain were displayed side by side. One, taken weeks ago, was a dark landscape with faint, flickering lights. The other, taken that morning, showed a brilliant network of new pathways, glowing like a nascent galaxy coming into existence. The lead doctor spoke in careful, measured tones about unexplained neurogenesis and spontaneous synaptic regeneration, but the scientific jargon was a thin veil for the simple truth. They were witnessing the impossible. They had no medical explanation for Lily's recovery. For them, it was an anomaly. For Arthur, it was the echo of a whisper. Overwhelmed by a gratitude so profound it felt like an ache in his chest, Arthur sought out Elena. He found her in the sterile employee break room, a starkly lit space that smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. She was sitting alone, quietly eating a sandwich from a small, reusable container. He approached her, the words of the neurologist tumbling from his lips in a clumsy, awestruck rush. He tried to explain the scans, the impossible science, the miracle that had unfolded. Then, reverting to the only language he truly understood, he made his offer. He spoke of a trust fund for her son, a new home in any neighborhood she chose, a life where she would never have to wear a uniform or scrub a floor again. He wasn't just offering money. He was trying to impose order on a miracle, to balance the cosmic scales with the weight of his fortune, because the sheer, unpayable debt of her gift was terrifying to him. Elena listened patiently, her expression never changing. When he finished, she simply shook her head, a gentle but absolute refusal that silenced him more effectively than any argument. She set her sandwich aside, her gaze drifting to a point somewhere beyond the sterile walls of the room. "There is nothing to pay for, Arthur," she said, using his first name with a quiet familiarity that now felt entirely natural. She began to tell him about her son, Matteo. Years ago, he was a vibrant, laughing 6-year-old, until a speeding car ran a red light, leaving him broken and unconscious on the pavement. The driver never stopped. She described her own frantic vigil in a crowded public hospital, a world of overworked nurses and constant beeping chaos, a stark contrast to the private luxury of Lily's suite. She spoke of doctors with tired eyes, giving her the same hopeless prognosis he had received. She then recounted the single longest night of her life, a memory etched into her soul. Matteo's condition had taken a critical turn, his small body failing, the alarms on his monitors screaming a symphony of defeat. The doctors had gently told her there was nothing more they could do but wait. In that suffocating darkness, stripped of all hope, she fell to her knees on the cold linoleum floor. She made a vow, a desperate, tear-soaked bargain with God. She promised that if her son was allowed to live, she would spend the rest of her days as an instrument of hope for others. She would seek out the hopeless and share the mercy she was begging for. She would repay the miracle every single day. By dawn, against all odds, Matteo's fever had broken. He had survived. Her prayer for Lily was never just a prayer. It was the sacred fulfillment of that promise. Arthur sat in stunned silence, the air knocked from his lungs. Her story recontextualized everything. This wasn't a random act of kindness. It was a profound act of faith, the continuation of a promise born from unimaginable pain and a miraculous reprieve. He was not the recipient of a chance event, but a witness to a sacred duty being performed. He saw Elena not as a cleaner, but as a guardian of hope, a woman whose quiet strength was forged in a fire he could now finally understand. A deep, humbling wave of emotion washed over him. clearing away the last remnants of his pride. He felt a powerful resolve to help her, not as a payment, but as an honor. But what he didn't know was that the identity of the driver from that hit-and-run years ago was a secret fate was about to violently uncover. A fire had been lit within Arthur, a purpose that transcended profit margins and stock prices. He was no longer just a father waiting helplessly. He was a man with a debt of honor to repay. He couldn't give Elena money, but he could give her justice. In the cold blue light of his temporary office at the hospital, he unleashed the full might of his resources, not to acquire a company, but to hunt a ghost. His best private investigators, men who could find a whisper in a hurricane, were given a single, urgent directive: find the driver of the hit-and-run that nearly took Matteo's life all those years ago. He provided them with every detail Elena had shared: the date, the approximate time, the intersection. He watched the digital hounds get to work, a feeling of righteous fury propelling him forward, certain he was about to right a terrible wrong for the woman who had performed a miracle for him. The gears of his empire, once grinding to find a cure for Lily, now turned with terrifying efficiency to uncover a secret buried by time. Within 48 hours, a notification chimed on his encrypted tablet. The investigators had found something. They had cross-referenced traffic camera fragments, repair shop invoices for a specific model of luxury sedan with front-end damage from that week, and anonymous tips from a long-closed police file. The information arrived in a sleek, password-protected folder, a testament to his power to command answers from the universe. Arthur felt a grim satisfaction as he sat alone, the city lights twinkling far below. He was about to deliver a name, a face, to Elena's nameless pain. He was about to close a chapter of suffering for her, an act that felt like the only appropriate thank you for the gift she had given his daughter. He was finally doing something that mattered. His finger hovered over the final file, the one labeled Vehicle Registration and Owner Identification. He tapped the screen, and the document materialized, crisp and official. A black, luxury sedan. The make and model matched one he used to drive. He felt a faint, cold prickle on his neck as he scanned the details. The date of the incident was there in stark, black font, a date that seemed vaguely, unsettlingly familiar. He scrolled down, his eyes landing on the section for the registered owner. The world stopped. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. Time itself seemed to bend and warp around the glowing letters on the screen, because beneath the heading was a name that stopped his heart cold, a name that screamed at him from the past, accusing and absolute. The name was Arthur Vance. A silent, screaming vortex opened up in his mind, pulling him back through the years to that exact evening. He had been late for a crucial dinner meeting, closing a deal that would cement his legacy. He remembered the anger, the impatience, the heated argument he was having on his hands-free phone. He remembered a sudden, jarring thump, a bump in the road he had dismissed as a pothole in his single-minded rush. He never looked back. He never even slowed down. The realization crashed over him with the force of a physical blow. The monster Elena had prayed to forgive, the faceless coward who had shattered her world and left her child for dead on the pavement, was him. He was the villain in her story. The entire universe seemed to shrink down to this single, horrific, unforgivable truth, a cosmic, cruel irony that was too monstrous to comprehend. The expensive tablet slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the polished mahogany desk with a sound that seemed to echo the shattering of his entire existence. He stared at his own reflection in the dark screen, but the man looking back was a stranger, a monster cloaked in a tailored suit. Every moment with Elena, every shared silence, every word of gratitude he had spoken was now a lie. Poisoned by this colossal, buried sin, her act of pure, selfless grace had been extended to the very man who had shown her the cruelest indifference. His daughter's miracle was now inextricably bound to his greatest shame. His world hadn't just been turned upside down. It had been utterly and completely annihilated, leaving him adrift in an airless void of his own making, with a truth he could never escape and could never, ever confess. The world, which had just begun to regain its color and hope, was plunged back into a suffocating grey. The revelation did not ignite remorse in Arthur. It triggered a primal defense mechanism of profound, icy shame. He couldn't face her. The next day, when Elena arrived for her customary visit, the warmth that had bloomed between them was gone, replaced by a frigid, unbridgeable distance. He stood by the window, his back to her, feigning intense interest in the cityscape below. He felt her presence in the room, like a physical weight, a silent accusation that made the air too thick to breathe. Every steady beep from Lily's heart monitor, once a symphony of hope, now served as a torturous reminder of his monstrous hypocrisy. He was a fraud, a villain masquerading as a grateful father, and the kindness she had shown him now felt like a brand of fire upon his soul, a debt he could never, ever repay. Elena felt the change instantly, a palpable drop in the room's emotional temperature. The man who had shared his vulnerability with her, who had looked at her with eyes full of desperate gratitude, was gone. In his place stood a statue carved from granite and gilt, his shoulders rigid, his silence a wall of impenetrable ice. She tried to bridge the new chasm between them with a quiet greeting, but his response was a clipped, dismissive grunt that never left the window pane. She watched him, her heart aching with a confusion she couldn't name. Had she offended him? Had the return of his daughter's health somehow erased his memory of the despair they had shared? She performed her quiet ritual, whispering words of encouragement to Lily, but the sanctity of the moment was gone, polluted by the thick, unspoken tension emanating from the man across the room. She felt like an intruder once more, a ghost in a pale blue uniform. Inside Arthur's mind, a storm of self-justification and denial raged. His pride, the very engine of his existence, refused to accept the role of the villain. It was a tragic coincidence, a cruel twist of fate, nothing more. He hadn't intended to cause harm. He was simply a man in a hurry, a titan with the weight of an empire on his shoulders. This narrative, however flimsy, was the only thing protecting him from complete collapse. An ugly, irrational resentment toward Eleanor began to fester in the dark corners of his soul. Her quiet grace, her unwavering faith, it all felt like a judgment now. He felt stripped bare before her, his power and wealth rendered meaningless. He was the man who had nearly destroyed her family, and she was the woman who had saved his. This inversion of power was an unbearable humiliation, and his wounded ego recoiled, choosing anger over the crushing weight of atonement. The breaking point arrived several days into this new, cold war. Unable to endure the suffocating silence any longer, Elena approached him as he stood his silent vigil by the window. "Arthur," she began, her voice gentle but firm, laced with a plea for understanding. "Please tell me what I have done." He turned slowly, and the raw torment in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. But what came from his lips was not a confession, but a cruel and calculated rejection. "You have done nothing," he said, his voice a low, chilling monotone. "But your services are no longer required. Lily's doctors are pleased with her progress. We have it from here." The words were a deliberate cruelty, a surgical strike designed to sever the sacred bond they had formed. He was pushing away the source of his miracle, choosing the isolation of his secret over the unbearable humility of the truth. Elena's face registered a flash of deep, profound hurt, but she did not crumble. Her quiet dignity remained intact, a silent testament to a strength Arthur could neither comprehend nor possess. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, knowing sadness. She looked past his cold facade and saw the terrified, broken man hiding within, thrashing in a prison of his own making. She gave a single, sorrowful nod, accepting his verdict without a fight. "I will pray for her," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "and for you." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, her soft footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space he had created. The door clicked shut, sealing him inside his gilded cage. Arthur was alone with his guilt, the silence he had craved now a deafening roar, leaving him to wonder if he had just shattered the one thing that could have truly saved him. The silence Elena left behind was a living entity, a suffocating presence that pressed in on Arthur from all sides. He stood frozen, listening to the steady, rhythmic beat of the heart monitor, a sound that now mocked him with its unwavering hope. It was a rhythm purchased not with his wealth, but with the grace of a woman he had wronged in the most unforgivable way. He looked at his daughter, her peaceful face a testament to a miracle he did not deserve. The reflection staring back at him from the panoramic window was no longer a titan of industry, but a hollow man, a coward hiding behind a fortress of lies. In that moment, the immense weight of his guilt finally crushed the last vestiges of his pride. He knew that pushing Elena away was a second, more profound crime, an act of cowardice that poisoned the very air Lily breathed. He had to confess. The truth was a fire in his bones, and he knew it would consume him entirely if he did not let it out. He found her at the end of a long, sterile corridor, preparing to leave for the night. Her movements were weary but methodical as she wiped down her cleaning cart one last time. "Elena!" he called out, his voice raw and unfamiliar even to his own ears. She turned, her expression guarded, prepared for another dismissal. But the man standing before her was not the cold executive from Lily's room. His expensive suit was rumpled. His face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated agony. He took a few unsteady steps toward her, the vast, polished floor separating them like a desolate wasteland. He didn't offer excuses or justifications. He simply stood before her, stripped of all his power and prestige, and offered the only thing he had left, the ugly, devastating truth. "The driver," he choked out, the words tearing from his throat. "The hit and run. All those years ago, the one who never stopped for your son. It was me." A profound stillness settled over the hallway, broken only by the distant hum of the hospital's machinery. Elena's face registered not shock or fury, but a deep, ancient sorrow, as if a truth her soul had long suspected was finally being spoken aloud. She simply looked at him, her gaze cutting through the years of his deception, seeing the terrified, broken man he had become. She saw the prison of guilt he had built around himself, a cage far more confining than any poverty she had ever known. Arthur braced himself for the hatred, for the righteous condemnation he so richly deserved. He waited for her to scream, to call security, to destroy him as he had once nearly destroyed her family. Instead, she took a slow breath, and in that single exhalation she seemed to release years of buried pain. Her quiet was not an absence of feeling, but a deep, resonant act of processing a pain that had finally been given a name and a face. "Why?" Arthur whispered, the question hanging in the air between them, fragile and desperate. "Why don't you hate me?" Elena's eyes, which had seen so much hardship, filled not with tears of anger, but with a powerful, clarifying compassion. "Hate would have been a poison, Arthur," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "When I made my promise that night, I begged for a miracle, and when it was granted, I knew I couldn't honor it by carrying darkness in my heart. Forgiving the person who hurt my son wasn't about letting them go unpunished. It was about setting myself free." She took a step closer, bridging the final gap between their two worlds. "I have prayed for that driver every single night for years. I just never knew I was also praying for you." Her forgiveness was not a transaction. It was a release, a final, sacred fulfillment of her vow, offered not to a monster, but to a man lost in the dark. They returned to Lily's room together, the heavy shroud of guilt and tension finally lifted. A soft, early morning light was beginning to filter through the window, casting a warm, gentle glow across the space. The air was no longer sterile and cold, but filled with a quiet, sacred peace. As they stood side by side at the foot of the bed, a new sound entered the room. Softer than any monitor's beep, it was a gentle sigh. Arthur and Elena watched, their breath held in a shared moment of awe as Lily's eyelids began to flutter. Slowly, miraculously, her eyes opened. They were no longer vacant, but clear and present. Her gaze moved from the morning light to the two figures standing before her, a silent recognition dawning on her face. In that moment, the true miracle was not just a girl waking from a long sleep, but the profound act of forgiveness that had finally, truly brought her home. The months that followed were not a return to the old world, but the quiet, deliberate construction of a new one. The sterile silence of the hospital was replaced by the warm, vibrant sounds of life in a sun-drenched park. Arthur Vance, no longer imprisoned in a tailored suit, now wore the comfortable uniform of a father, jeans and a simple shirt, often adorned with a small grass stain or a smudge of ice cream. He watched as Lily, her laughter a melody he once thought he'd never hear again, chased after Matteo, their playful shouts echoing under the wide, blue sky. Elena sat beside him on the park bench, not as an employee or a stranger, but as the quiet architect of his second chance. They were a strange and beautiful constellation, two families from opposite universes, now orbiting the same shared sun of gratitude and newfound joy, their pasts not forgotten, but redeemed. Arthur learned that true wealth was not measured in stock portfolios or corporate acquisitions, but in the weight of a child's hand in his own, in the easy silence shared with a true friend, in the freedom of a conscience finally at peace. He looked at Elena, who was now explaining the shape of a cloud to a captivated Lily, and he saw the embodiment of a strength his billions could never purchase. He had since established a foundation, not with a press conference and a grand announcement, but with a quiet, anonymous donation. It was named the Lily and Matteo Project, dedicated to covering the hidden costs for families with critically ill children, the missed work, the travel, the simple meals. It was his daily act of atonement, a way of repaying a debt that was not owed to Elena, but to the universe itself, a silent promise to honor the mercy he had been shown. The journey had taught him a profound and humbling lesson, one that reshaped his entire understanding of the world. Life often teaches us that the greatest miracles are not about bending the world to our will, but about having the courage to surrender to a higher purpose. For years, Arthur had navigated his life like a warship, charting a course with ruthless precision, believing his power could conquer any storm. Yet it was only when he was truly shipwrecked, stripped of all control, and left with nothing but a stranger's prayer, that he discovered the true harbor. He learned that what sometimes feels like a devastating dead end is merely the universe redirecting you to a path your soul was always meant to walk, a path leading not to more power, but to genuine peace. This story of a broken man, a faithful mother, and the whisper that changed everything is a testament to the quiet power that resides in every human heart. It is a reminder that compassion is a currency that never loses its value, and that forgiveness has the strength to heal wounds we believe to be fatal. The connection between Arthur and Elena was not an accident. It was a destiny woven from pain, prayer, and a profound shared humanity that transcended their stations in life. If this story of redemption and unexpected grace has touched your spirit, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that hope can be found in the most unlikely of places, often in the quietest of whispers, waiting to be heard. As the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, it bathed the park in a soft, golden light. the kind of light that makes the world feel new and full of promise. Arthur gave Lily's swing one more gentle push, sending her soaring into the golden air, her laughter the purest sound he had ever known. He caught Elena's eye, and in her gaze he saw no trace of the past's deep wounds, only a shared understanding and the peaceful promise of tomorrow. In that perfect, fleeting moment, surrounded by the family he hadn't known he was searching for, Arthur Vance finally understood. Hope is not just a feeling. It is a language that even the silent can hear, a light that no darkness can ever truly extinguish, and the most valuable treasure a human soul can ever hope to possess.